In the frozen ruins of Metz, France, 1944, death had a pattern. Every time an American sniper dared to look through his scope, he died. German sharpshooters were ghosts, invisible, perfect, untouchable. 23 U.S. snipers gone in 3 weeks. Then came a young soldier named Michael Donovan, 22 years old, exhausted, and out of options. One night, surrounded by rubble and silence, he did something so absurd his commander called it the stupidest field modification I've ever seen. He taped a shaving mirror to his rifle. What happened next rewrote the rules of sniper warfare, not in a laboratory, but in the ruins of a bombed-out bakery. A single reflection turned hunters into the hunted, flipped death itself back toward the enemy and saved hundreds of lives. Yet somehow, history forgot his name. If stories like this one make you stop and think about courage, desperation, and the tiny inventions that change history, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share this video. It helps us bring more untold moments like these to life. And trust me, what Donovan did next will make you see Wehrmacht snipers in a way you've never imagined before. November 1944. The city of Metz, France, was no longer a city. It was a carcass of stone and smoke. What once had been cobblestone streets lined with bakeries and cafes now lay under mountains of rubble, where windowless buildings looked like broken teeth jutting from the frozen earth. Every echo, every flicker of movement could be the end of someone's life. The Germans had dug in deep, turning the city into a labyrinth of kill zones and crossfire. For the Allied snipers sent in to clear it, Metz wasn't just another objective. It was a nightmare dressed in fog and brick dust. Men didn't last long here, not because they lacked courage, but because they never saw what killed them. To the untrained eye, sniping was supposed to be about patience, precision, and calm, but in Metz, those virtues became liabilities. The Americans would take a position, settle behind their scopes, breathe slowly, and then, crack! A bullet would find them before they ever pulled the trigger. 23 dead in 3 weeks, each man replaced by another who thought he'd learn from the last, only to die just as quickly. Their commanders called it bad luck. Their comrades called it something worse, a curse. But the truth was far more chilling. The Germans weren't just better shots. They were running a deadly system, one that made every sniper who looked through his scope into a target the moment his eye touched the glass. The German doctrine was called Doppelstellung, or double position, 2 snipers working in sync, one to bait and one to kill. The first would draw attention, maybe fire a shot, maybe just shift enough to be seen. When the American aimed at him, the second sniper, hidden somewhere at a different angle, already had the American lined up. A simple trick of geometry, cruelly efficient, mathematically perfect. Every American shot was a roll of the dice, every glimpse through a scope a death sentence. And the Germans? They had the patience of predators. They'd study a battlefield for hours, mapping sight lines, noting reflections, tracking muzzle flashes. When they finally fired, it wasn't instinct. It was inevitability. By November's first week, the U.S. 5th Infantry Division had learned to fear stillness itself. Even when they weren't under fire, they could feel the crosshairs waiting. Young men who had once bragged about headshots on the range now flinched at shadows. Some refused to scope at all, relying on instinct and prayer. They swapped positions constantly, crawled through ruins like ghosts, and whispered the same question in every bombed-out cellar. How do you fight an enemy you can't see? For most, the answer never came. But in one of those cellars, a half-collapsed bakery that still smelled faintly of burnt flour, a young sniper named Michael Donovan was about to find one. For the men fighting in Metz, the German sniper wasn't just an opponent, he was a phantom. Soldiers would whisper about him as if he were everywhere and nowhere at once. Some swore they could feel eyes on them before a shot ever rang out. Others claimed to have seen glints in the mist, only to find nothing when they aimed. The truth was that German sniper doctrine wasn't built on luck or superstition. It was a cold, intellectual art. The Wehrmacht had turned sniping into a science. Long before the Americans reached France, German sharpshooters had perfected the Doppelstellung tactic across the Eastern Front, learning how to break an enemy's confidence before breaking his skull. They understood something most Allied officers didn't, that war wasn't just about firepower. It was about perception. Control what the enemy sees, and you control what he fears. Their double-position teams were designed to manipulate that fear. The first sniper would create the illusion of exposure, maybe fire a shot from a window, or lean just enough to draw attention. That flicker of motion was all it took. The American, peering through his scope, would lock on to that bait. But the moment he did, his focus narrowed to an 8-degree tunnel, a perfect trap. The second sniper, already watching from a flanking angle, would wait for the gleam of the American's scope. One twitch of the trigger, and another life ended before the American even saw his killer. In those ruins, that geometry was lethal. The Springfield rifle's 8x scope gave brilliant magnification, but robbed its user of awareness. Looking through it was like staring through a straw at an ocean of threats. You could see a single window 400 yards away in sharp detail, but everything else, rooftops, alleyways, rubble piles, vanished into blind spots. The Germans exploited that blindness mercilessly. They studied sightlines like chess players analyzing a board, predicting every angle of approach, every blind corner, every possible mistake. By the time an American sniper pulled the trigger, his position was already compromised. No amount of camouflage or quick relocation could save him if he didn't even know where death was coming from. And yet, amid this mathematical slaughter, the Americans refused to quit. They rotated positions constantly. They changed scopes. They even experimented with decoy rifles. But every fix failed because none of them addressed the real issue: vision. The Germans weren't faster. They were simply seeing more. That was their invisible weapon: information. It was the difference between hunting and hiding, between awareness and ignorance. The battlefield was theirs because they understood it better. The Americans could fight back all they wanted, but until someone figured out how to see the unseen, Metz would keep claiming they're dead. What no one realized, not yet, was that the answer wouldn't come from strategy or command. It would come from one soldier with a mirror, a roll of tape, and a refusal to die by the book. Before Metz turned him into a legend that history forgot, Michael Donovan was just another farm kid from Illinois. Steady hands, sharp eyes, and a quiet sense of duty that made him the kind of soldier others wanted to follow. He wasn't the loudest in training, but he didn't need to be. At Fort Benning, his instructors called him Steady Aim, a nickname born from his uncanny ability to shoot calmly under pressure. He graduated top of his class, the kind of soldier the manuals loved to write about. Disciplined, methodical, reliable. But what the manuals never said was how fast those traits could turn against you in a war that rewarded unpredictability. By the time he reached the front lines in France, the rules had changed. Precision no longer guaranteed survival. Only adaptation did. Donovan's first month in combat taught him lessons no training course ever could. He watched friends vanish mid-sentence, their helmets spinning off into the mud before the echo of gunfire faded. He learned how the smell of cordite clung to your hands even after you washed, how silence wasn't peace but a warning. And yet, through it all, he held on to something rare: patience. Even when fear gnawed at his nerves, he moved like a man who trusted himself more than luck. But after 6 months of fighting, even that confidence began to crack. Every sniper he'd trained with was dead or wounded. Each death felt closer, more personal, as if the war were circling in on him, waiting for its turn. Then came Martinez, his new spotter, just 19, nervous, still learning how to breathe without shaking when bullets snapped overhead. Donovan took to him instantly, maybe because he saw in the kid a version of himself before the war had stripped away the innocence. Together they operated out of the ruins of a bakery on Metz's eastern edge, a place that once smelled of bread and sugar but now reeked of damp plaster and gun oil. It was there, in the dull gray light of early November, that Donovan began to understand what no one else had. They weren't losing because they were unskilled. They were losing because the battlefield itself was lying to them. Their scopes, those supposed instruments of precision, were betraying them. He started sketching diagrams in the dust, fields of view, angles, blind spots. It was something no officer had time for, but Donovan couldn't stop. His obsession became survival. If the Germans were beating them with awareness, then he needed to find a way to see what they saw, to look forward without losing the world behind him. That realization came not from a briefing or a command, but from watching Martinez nearly die when a flanking sniper fired from a window they'd both assumed was empty. The bullet missed by inches, hitting the wall behind them. As dust filled the air, Donovan's mind raced faster than his pulse. The problem wasn't courage or training or position. It was perspective. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to change that with an idea so unorthodox that even he thought it sounded ridiculous. A mirror taped to a rifle. The night before his breakthrough, the ruins of Metz were silent, except for the groans of distant artillery. The city seemed to breathe in rhythm with the guns. Long, uneven exhalations of dust and smoke. Donovan sat alone in what was left of the bakery, oiling his Springfield rifle by the flickering light of a candle. Martinez was asleep, curled up near a shattered window, too tired to dream. Donovan's eyes lingered on his scope, the polished glass, the brass fittings, the weapon that had brought him both survival and despair. He couldn't stop thinking about that one blind spot, the invisible corner where death always waited. His thoughts spiraled back to geometry, angles, reflections, to the problem of seeing more than one direction at once. Then, almost absently, his gaze fell on a small, square object sitting among his kit, his shaving mirror. It was standard issue, 4 inches by 6, scratched, slightly warped, utterly ordinary. But in that moment, it became something else, a possibility. Donovan turned it in his hand, catching faint glimmers of light from the candle. He tilted it left, then right, noticing how the reflected image shifted behind him without him having to move. The idea hit him so hard it felt like electricity. What if I could see behind me without breaking my aim? He knew it was absurd, even reckless. The Army had regulations for everything, especially rifle modifications. But regulations didn't matter to the dead, and he'd buried enough friends to know the difference between permission and survival. He spent the next hour working quietly, the candle burning low as he experimented with angles. He stripped electrical tape from a signal wire, measured distances with rough guesses, and fixed the mirror to the left side of his scope at a 45-degree angle, just far enough forward to catch his peripheral vision without blocking the main sightline. When he looked through the scope now, the mirror showed him a ghostly slice of the world behind him, a doorway, a flicker of movement, the faint glow of Martinez's breath in the cold. It wasn't perfect. The reflection was small, distorted, difficult to read. But it worked. He could see behind him without moving his head. For a sniper, that was something close to witchcraft. He tested it again, adjusted the tape, checked the balance. It threw off the rifle's 0 just slightly, but not enough to matter. After 40 minutes of tinkering, he sat back and stared at his creation. A shaving mirror, some tape, and an idea born out of fear. It looked ridiculous. But for the first time in weeks, Donovan smiled. At dawn, he showed it to Martinez. The younger soldier stared in disbelief, half laughing, half terrified. "Sir, that's not regulation." Donovan smirked. Neither is dying. They both knew the risk, not just of the battlefield, but of punishment. Unauthorized modifications could get you written up, even court-martialed. But what was the alternative? Wait to be the next corpse on the casualty report? When the sun began to rise over the ruins of Metz, painting the shattered rooftops gold, Donovan took position behind his scope, the mirror glinting faintly beside him. Somewhere out there, 2 German snipers were already scanning for him. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that this morning, for the first time, their prey could see them coming. November 3rd, 1944. The morning mist hung low over Metz like a living thing, thick, cold, and silent enough to make every sound feel suspicious. Donovan and Martinez took position in the ruined bakery, the same place they'd nearly died days before. Broken glass crunched beneath their boots as they crawled into place, spreading a torn blanket across the floor to muffle their movement. Through the shattered window, Donovan could just make out the factory complex 400 yards away. That was where the Germans nested. Dark windows, jagged edges, too many places to hide a scope. Martinez scanned with binoculars, his breath fogging the lenses. Donovan steadied his rifle, his finger hovering just above the trigger guard. He'd done this dozens of times before, but today something was different. Today, the mirror caught a faint shimmer of light on its surface, the reflection of dawn, and perhaps something else. For nearly an hour, they waited. Sniping wasn't the chaos of war movies. It was patience stretched to its breaking point. Every second crawled, every breath counted. Then, at precisely 7:23 a.m., Donovan spotted movement, a flicker on the 3rd floor of the factory, a German adjusting his rifle near a blown-out window. The crosshairs found him instantly. The shot was there, clean, perfect. Donovan began his routine. Inhale, exhale, half squeeze, and then, out of the corner of his eye, the mirror flashed. It wasn't light this time. It was motion, behind them. Donovan froze. His pulse spiked. Through the reflection, he saw a shadow shift among the rubble behind their flank, roughly 60 degrees off their rear left. Another sniper. The second half of the Doppelstellung, already aiming straight at them. Donovan whispered one word. 6 o'clock. Martinez didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he pivoted and fired toward the glint of metal the mirror had revealed. Donovan fired a fraction of a second later, his bullet shattering the factory window and dropping the German inside. The sound of 2 rifles cracked through the morning, one shot echoing the other. And then silence. For a moment, neither man moved. The air was thick with disbelief. Then Martinez looked up, eyes wide. "Sir, they're both down." Donovan didn't answer. He was staring at the mirror, still taped to his rifle, fogged slightly at the edges but gleaming faintly in the pale light. It had worked. Against all logic, all doctrine, all expectation, it had worked. What followed was 4 hours of sustained engagement, the kind that grinds men into ghosts. German snipers tried every trick in the book. They shifted positions, fired decoys, used reflections and dummy scopes. But every time they moved, the mirror caught them. The subtle shimmer of a helmet, the twitch of a muzzle flash, a crawling figure in the corner of Donovan's vision. It was as if he'd grown a second pair of eyes. By noon, 6 German snipers lay dead. Donovan had taken 4, Martinez, 2. The factory was finally silent. When their platoon reached them hours later, they found the 2 men covered in dust and disbelief, still alive, still watching the horizon. Donovan simply lifted his rifle and tapped the small square mirror with his finger. "Tell command," he said quietly. It wasn't luck. Word travels fast in war, faster than orders, faster than truth. By the time the sun set on November 3rd, every sniper platoon in the 5th Infantry Division had heard whispers about a guy in a bombed-out bakery who was seeing ghosts through his rifle. At first, they laughed it off. Soldiers always told stories to stay sane, about lucky charms, divine protection, or impossible shots made on instinct. But this story was different. Donovan's name came up again and again, always with the same impossible detail. He'd taken on a German sniper team and lived. More than that, he'd outsmarted them. When the rumor reached Captain Robert Hayes, the battalion's sniper commander, he didn't believe it either. But when he looked at Donovan's after-action report, 6 confirmed kills, 0 losses, disbelief turned into something else. Curiosity. By the following morning, the bakery became a magnet. Snipers, spotters, even skeptical officers crowded around Donovan's rifle, staring at the square of taped glass like it was a relic. Someone called it the stupidest smart idea I've ever seen. Others just nodded in quiet awe. Donovan explained nothing mystical, just geometry, awareness, survival. He showed them how the mirror widened his peripheral vision, how it gave him seconds, maybe only 2 or 3, but enough to catch movement that no scope could ever reveal. The others began copying it instantly, scavenging whatever reflective scraps they could find. Some tore side mirrors from wrecked jeeps, others polished pieces of chrome from bombed-out cars. Within 48 hours, the mirror mod had spread across 3 sniper squads, completely unofficial and completely unstoppable. The effect was immediate and brutal. German snipers, so used to dictating the rhythm of battle, suddenly found their tactics unraveling. The familiar dance, bait, fire, relocate, no longer worked. American teams stopped dying in predictable patterns. The Doppelstellung advantage vanished. In 1 week, German sniper losses doubled. In 2, the kill ratio flipped entirely. The enemy couldn't understand how their hidden flanking shots were being spotted before they fired. They began second-guessing, hesitating, and hesitation, in sniper warfare, is death. One report described German units abandoning positions entirely after realizing the Americans could see angles that should be impossible. Donovan's mirror had shattered not just their tactics, but their confidence. In the chaos of war, clarity is rare, but in those ruined streets, a strange calm took hold. For the first time in months, American snipers could breathe without feeling hunted. The battlefield hadn't changed, but how they saw it had. Soldiers began to trust the mirror like an extra sense, a silent partner that whispered of danger before it struck. Some even gave them nicknames: Guardian Glass, Angel Eye. Donovan never called it anything. He just kept refining the angle, training others, helping them tape mirrors to their rifles late into the night. To him, it wasn't about invention or recognition. It was about restoring balance to men who'd been living with a target painted on their foreheads. For once, they weren't prey. For once, they could look through their scopes without wondering if someone was already looking back. It didn't take long for the mirror trick to reach command, and predictably, the moment it did, everything became complicated. Military bureaucracy has a talent for slowing down what necessity speeds up. By mid-November, field officers were sending mixed messages. Unofficially, keep using the mirrors. Officially, remove all unauthorized equipment modifications immediately. The contradiction was almost comical. Donovan's simple taped-up mirror was saving lives, but it also broke at least 7 different regulations regarding rifle integrity and sight modifications. When Captain Hayes brought Donovan's rifle to a formal inspection, the first words from the reviewing officer were, "What the hell is that?" Hayes simply replied, "That, sir, is why half my men are still breathing." The problem wasn't the idea, it was who had the idea. Innovation from the bottom rarely sits well at the top. The Army liked its solutions stamped, documented, and approved, not born out of desperation in a bombed-out bakery. Donovan had no rank, no lab, no credentials, just results. And results without paperwork don't fit neatly into reports. For weeks, headquarters debated what to do. Some officers argued for immediate standardization. Others worried about setting a precedent for field improvisation without authorization. Behind those sterile phrases was the quiet fear of losing control. Because if one private could change doctrine with a piece of glass and tape, what did that say about the system built to control him? Meanwhile, on the ground, The men didn't wait for permission. By late November, mirrors had become as common as ammunition. Soldiers scavenged from wreckage, polished fragments of glass, even melted down tin to create makeshift reflectors. The mirror had stopped being an invention. It was a movement. Donovan never asked for credit. He didn't even sign his name on reports. He was too busy making sure his unit's kill-to-loss ratio kept climbing. When Captain Hayes finally submitted a formal request to recognize the modification, it vanished somewhere in the endless maze of military paperwork. By the time it resurfaced, the language had changed. Improvised optical peripheral device observed in field conditions. Origin uncertain. Donovan's name was gone, replaced by bureaucratic fog. When he heard the report read aloud weeks later, Donovan only laughed, a dry, tired laugh that came from a place beyond frustration. "Let them have it," he said quietly. "It's theirs now." For him, the mirror was never about fame or invention. It was about survival. But for the Army, survival alone wasn't enough. It needed ownership. So the papers filed upward, stripped of names, cleaned of context, until by the time the story reached command, it was a sanitized version of reality, a useful field innovation observed in multiple units. Nothing about the bakery, nothing about desperation, nothing about the 22-year-old soldier who just refused to die by the rules. In that moment, Donovan became something he never asked to be: anonymous. By December 1944, the mirror had become more than a field modification. It was a symbol. You could walk through the sniper platoons of the 5th Infantry and spot them immediately. Little flashes of light catching on the side of rifles, bits of tape fluttering in the cold wind. They came in all shapes and materials: shaving mirrors, shards of chrome, even broken pieces of glass polished smooth with sand. Each one told the same story. Someone, somewhere, had heard what Donovan did and decided they weren't going to die blind. No official orders were issued, no supply chains adjusted, just soldiers teaching soldiers, an underground current of ingenuity spreading through the ranks. It was the kind of innovation no manual could explain, born from the simple human refusal to accept unfair odds. The change on the battlefield was staggering. Within weeks, sniper casualty ratios flipped. What had been 2 Americans killed for every German was now 4 Germans for every 1 American. German sniper units, once the terror of urban warfare, found themselves outmaneuvered and outguessed. Reports filtered back through intelligence channels describing unusual awareness among American marksmen, targets who seemed to anticipate ambushes, spotting flanking shooters before they fired. The Wehrmacht's finely tuned counter-sniper doctrine, refined through years of brutal experience on the Eastern Front, was unraveling because of a 4-inch mirror and some electrical tape. What no one at the top seemed to grasp was that this wasn't just a tactical shift. It was a psychological one. For the first time, American snipers weren't afraid to look. Captain Hayes knew exactly what that meant. During an inspection on November 10th, he examined Donovan's rifle himself, the mirror scratched, the tape worn, but still functional. Standing amid the rubble, he reportedly said, "If the rulebook didn't make this, maybe the rulebook's wrong." That simple statement broke the invisible barrier between regulation and reality. Hayes made it official battalion policy. Every sniper rifle in the unit would carry a mirror. His decision wasn't backed by Washington or any research division. It was backed by results. By mid-November, the entire 5th Infantry had adopted the modification. Soldiers stopped asking for permission and started passing the idea forward like a secret worth saving. No speeches, no ceremonies, just quiet survival. And it worked. Across Metz and beyond, mirror-equipped snipers began reporting engagement times cut by half, survivability tripled. For the first time since the invasion, they weren't on the losing end of the learning curve. German tactics grew erratic, desperate. The once confident enemy sharpshooters began relocating after every missed shot, terrified of the Americans' newfound omniscience. Some even abandoned their posts entirely, convinced they were being watched by hidden observers. In truth, they were, not by radar or spotter planes, but by their own reflections turned against them. What Donovan had created wasn't just a tool, it was an idea that stripped fear of its power. The mirror gave soldiers back something no weapon could: the ability to trust their own eyes again. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, Europe was a graveyard stitched together by victory parades and ruined cities. The men who survived came home to a world that had already moved on, a world that wanted heroes in headlines, not stories buried in the rubble of Metz. Michael Donovan was among those who slipped quietly through the cracks. He returned to Illinois, carrying nothing but a duffel bag, a rifle, and the faint tremor in his hands that never quite went away. There were no medals, no citations, no mention of the mirror that had saved dozens of lives. In official reports, his name was gone entirely, replaced by a faceless description: field innovation developed during combat operations, 1944-45. He didn't complain. In truth, he never expected anyone to remember. He'd done what he set out to do: survive, and help others do the same. Life after war was a different kind of battle. Donovan tried to return to normal, working in a machine shop, tending a small garden behind his house, sometimes spending long evenings staring into space as if still scanning horizons no one else could see. Martinez visited often. They'd sit on the porch in silence, not needing to speak, bound by memories too heavy for words. Occasionally, they'd talk about the war, always skirting around Metz until one of them, usually after a few drinks, would laugh and say, "Remember that stupid mirror?" And they'd both smile, the kind of smile that hides pain behind pride. Donovan never kept his rifle, never displayed his medals. The mirror idea, the thing that had rewritten sniper warfare, he simply let fade away, the way soldiers do with anything that reminds them how close they came to not making it home. Years turned into decades. New wars came and went, each one birthing its own innovations, its own forgotten heroes. Technology marched forward: new scopes, rangefinders, thermal optics, and the crude little mirror became obsolete. But the principle it embodied never really died. Military historians stumbled across it occasionally in after-action reports, noting improvised peripheral awareness devices used in Metz, but never tracing them back to a name. In 1987, one researcher, intrigued by the repeated references, began digging. He found Martinez, now in his 60s, who told him everything: the bakery, the geometry, the mirror, the kills. 2 years later, a small article appeared in a niche military history journal documenting the story in quiet academic tones. Almost nobody read it. Donovan himself never saw it. He passed away in June 2001, age 79. His obituary listed him as a veteran, a machinist, a husband, and a father of 2. There was no mention of mirrors or Metz or the countless men who owed him their lives. At his funeral, among the folding chairs and the rustle of flags, a handful of gray-haired veterans stood in silence, men whose names never appeared in textbooks either. They didn't give speeches. They just saluted, each knowing what words could never say. That history may have forgotten Donovan, but they hadn't. Somewhere in the archives of the National Infantry Museum at Fort Benning, there's an old Springfield rifle with a mirror taped to its scope. The placard beneath it reads, "Field Expedient Modification, developed during urban combat operations, 1944-45. The name is missing, but if you look close enough into the glass, you might just see the reflection of the man who refused to die by the rules. In the grand narrative of World War II, it's easy to lose people like Michael Donovan. History prefers big names and grand victories, generals, strategies, maps filled with arrows. But war isn't really shaped by those things. It's shaped by the moments when ordinary people refuse to do the predictable. Donovan's mirror wasn't designed in a lab or approved by a committee. It was born from fear, exhaustion, and the raw instinct to survive. And that's what makes it remarkable. In an age defined by industrial warfare, the simplest object imaginable, a 4-inch shaving mirror, outsmarted one of the most disciplined armies in history. It didn't just bend the rules of sniping, it rewrote them. The irony is, it was never supposed to exist. In a system built on hierarchy, Donovan's invention was an act of quiet rebellion. A soldier saying, "You don't get to write the rules for my survival." The army couldn't celebrate that openly because it exposed an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the best ideas don't come from command, but from the chaos below it. And yet, those are the ideas that save lives. When you strip away the medals, the protocols, and the paperwork, that's what war really is. A series of desperate improvisations made by men who can't afford to fail. Donovan's mirror wasn't just a trick of light and glass. It was proof that even in the darkest conditions, creativity could still be a weapon. Today, if you visit the National Infantry Museum, that mirror, or one like it, still hangs beside a rifle. Most people walk past it without noticing. A few pause, read the placard, and move on. It's just another artifact in a sea of stories. But if you stop long enough, if you imagine the young man crouched behind that rifle in a ruined bakery, you begin to understand the real lesson it carries. Innovation isn't always about invention. Sometimes it's about defiance, about seeing what others can't, or won't, see. Donovan's legacy isn't in the object itself, but in the mindset it represents. That when the system fails to protect you, you build your own system, even if it's held together by tape. The mirror trick eventually vanished from doctrine, replaced by newer tools, cleaner optics, digital sensors. But its spirit, the idea that awareness is everything, still shapes modern warfare. Soldiers today use panoramic sights, rear-view sensors, drones, and thermal imaging, all chasing the same truth Donovan found with a scrap of glass: that survival belongs to those who see first. History may have forgotten his name, but it never forgot his lesson. In the end, Michael Donovan didn't change the war. He changed the way men saw it. And maybe that's the most human kind of victory there is. Because sometimes all it takes to turn the tide of a battlefield is the courage to look at it from a different angle.